So, there's another anthology by Hawakal, Open Your Eyes, an anthology on climate change, poetry and prose, edited by Ranjit Hoskote. It's a collection of poems that explores the physical, emotional and spiritual perspectives of climate change. So, when we look at it, we find that it is a beautiful book, very expressive. It has a variety of poems. Another important writer is Sumana Roy. Her poems on trees are an eye opener to the deep connection between humans and trees. And I have provided the link to the website where you can read her poems in the references section at the end of my lecture. Samir Rafiq's collection of poems, Woman in the Trees, Poems on Climate and Nature, deals with climate change through the lens of female experiences and perceptions. So here we have another perspective on climate, and as we have earlier read about the feminist perspectives, so women are deeply related to the environment, and their exploitation has been equated to the exploitation of nature by patriarchy, by the capitalist system. So this book deals with a woman's perspective and a woman's relationship with the environment. These poems also echo the COVID trauma caused by climate change. Mourning for the natural world. Poets often evoke the concept of grief to express the pain of witnessing the destruction of the earth. This grief can be personal, cultural or collective, with poets addressing both their individual sense of loss and the broader loss felt by humanity as a whole. Elegies for nature. Many climate poems take the form of elegies, laments for the dead, but instead of mourning human lives, they mourn the loss of forests, animals, coral reefs and entire ecosystems. So an elegy was originally something that mourned the dead, but here the earth is a living being and they are mourning its death. These poems in the form of elegies, they mourn the loss of forest or animals, different components of the earth like coral reefs and ecosystems. Symbolism of extinction. Extinction is also a powerful motive in climate poetry, and it symbolizes not only the death of species but also the death of natural beauty and balance. The extinction of a single species is often portrayed as a tragic, irreversible event that disrupts the entire ecological fabric. So, extinction is also an important metaphor presented in a very powerful way, and which has multifaceted and multi-layered meanings, and it even to show the extinction of one species shows the destruction of the entire world, the entire ecological system. For example, Kathleen Jamie's poetry frequently deals with ecological grief, expressing sorrow over the vanishing natural world and the irreplaceable loss of species and landscapes. Nostalgia for a lost world. We already know that many species are extinct today, and there are certain species that are on the point of extinction, and they are endangered species. So we know that our children or our grandchildren might not see those species. So there is a nostalgia for a lost world which is evoked by climate poets who express a deep sense of nostalgia for a world that no longer exists, a world where nature thrived without the constant threat of human exploitation. The nostalgia is often tinged with a sense of helplessness, as poets recognize that much of what has been lost cannot be restored. So, numerous poets talk about their cities, their dwelling places, which they have seen changed by globalization and commercialization. Um, I myself have written some poems on my own town and the changes that it has undergone in the last 20 years. So there is nostalgia for the old world of my town, which was peaceful, which did not have roads that are clogged with traffic at all hours, uh, which were peaceful, where there was a lot of vegetation, where there used to be a lot of trees. Now more and more flats have come up, so the green areas have been cut down and to accommodate more and more flats. And the more flats that come in, the less of greenery is there, and suddenly the horizon becomes not a beautiful landscape that it was in the past, but it becomes a kind of ugly place where only stone buildings are there on every side. So, climate poets recognize this, and there's a nostalgia for a lost world, a nostalgia for a lost Eden. Some poets evoke the image of a lost Eden, a once pristine world that had been corrupted by human interference. This imagery serves as a reminder of the innocence and purity of nature before the onset of industrialization and climate change. So nowadays we continually hear about animal species crossing the boundaries of their threatened habitats and going into the farms and all, such as wild bears and wolves, and becoming a threat to human lives. So this is all a result of the lost places of old times, when the forests were intact, and when the animals had their sheltered world, and where they were not forced to relocate in human areas. So that is also something worth studying and looking at, the dislocation of birds which lose their habitat and they try to find um, a place in human dwellings, and thus many of them die because of that. So one of the examples, if the street lights and the sparkling glasses of multi-story buildings that cause birds to crash. So many poets deal with these things, and how in old peaceful times homes were such in which birds were welcome, and there were trees and there were gardens where they could rest and nest. So these are all lost Edens represented by climate poetry. So, for an example, C.M.S. Heaney, though primarily known for his work on human history and culture, also expressed ecological grief in his later poems, mourning the loss of Ireland's natural landscapes to modern development. So, this is the dilemma of a lot of towns and cities in countries around the world, where if people, if the land is not affected by drought, if the land is not flooded, then the land is used for building more and more constructions, and thus the land is depleted in another way, and an old Eden is lost. And human beings tend to live in those beautiful Edens of the past, and that is very well represented by C.M.S. Heaney and such poets through their nostalgia for the past. And yet, in spite of all the loss and the destruction and the sorrow, there is hope and renewal amidst grief. despite the pervasive sense of loss. Some climate poets also explore the possibility of renewal and resilience. While acknowledging the profound damage humans have caused, these poets suggest that there may still be hope for healing and restoration, both for nature and for humanity. So, as we read about eco spirituality earlier, there is hope if one tries to understand that there is a deep inner connection that we all have with nature, and from that comes hope that caring for nature, trying to heal it, will surely give some hope and will, in some measure, restore the balance that we have lost. Resilience of nature. Some poems highlight nature's ability to recover if given the chance, suggesting that humans must learn to live in harmony with the earth if we hope to mitigate the effects of climate change. So, there are some poets who show the strength of nature and how it bounces back if it is given a chance. It can heal if it has if it has human beings to care for it and not exploit it any further. Some of the poems they call for reconciliation. Climate poetry often ends with a call for reconciliation between humans and the environment, between industrial progress and sustainability. This theme represents a sliver of optimism amidst the overwhelming grief. So, there are various organizations and various NGOs who are working at this, and there are some climate groups who run online workshops. I remember participating in one such workshop related to greening the earth, and these people who run these workshops are climate activists in their own countries trying to save their forests. So they have certain kind of rituals and exercises derived from their tribal folklore. So there was something like we as online participants for this workshop, we were supposed to get masks for ourselves, the mask of any animal, or some bear or some bird, and then we were online. We had to say what we were, a crow or a pigeon, and then we were supposed to talk as a pigeon or a crow, try to feel one with nature and try to understand the predicament. So this was an excellent exercise, and to create hope and optimism in a climate change world. So one of the examples of reconciliation comes from Wendell Berry's poems, which reflect hope for renewal, emphasizing the possibility of repairing humanity's relationship with nature through sustainable practices and mindful living. So, climate poetry, with its complex and multifaceted themes, reflects the emotional, intellectual, and ethical challenges of living in a world facing an environmental crisis. Through the exploration of environmental degradation, climate change, human responsibility, and ecological grief, poets seek to inspire reflection and action, urging readers to confront the harsh realities of climate emergency while also reminding us of the beauty and fragility of the natural world that remains and that can restore itself if given a chance. Notable climate poets and their works. In the realm of contemporary poetry, several poets have gained prominence for addressing environmental issues, climate change, and the relationship between humanity and nature. These poets offer unique perspectives on the environmental crisis through the use of imagery, themes, and styles, creating works that challenge readers to reflect on the fragility of the earth and our responsibilities as its caretakers. There are important poets like Gary Snyder, W.S. Merwin, Jory Graham, and Alice Oswald. And they express environmental messages through their poetry. Gary Snyder. So Gary Snyder is an American poet, and they are the themes of nature, human responsibility, and environmental activism in his poetry. He is one of the four most influential voices in environmental poetry, often blending Eastern philosophy with ecological themes. He has long been a proponent of environmental activism, seeing poetry as a way to inspire deeper connection with nature and to encourage responsible stewardship of the earth. The key themes of Gary Snyder's poetry. Snyder's work is deeply rooted in his experiences as a naturalist, environmental activist, and practitioner of Zen Buddhism. His poems reflect a reverence for the natural world and emphasize the interconnectedness of all living beings. He often critiques modern industrial society for its exploitation of natural resources while also advocating for a return to more sustainable, ecologically sensitive ways of living. Human responsibility and ecology. Snyder believes that humans have a responsibility to live in harmony with the earth and not exploit it. He often critiques the consumerism and wastefulness of modern society, urging a more balanced and respectful relationship with nature. Nature as teacher. In his poetry, nature is not just a backdrop for human experiences, but a profound teacher, offering lessons on how to live mindfully and in harmony with the earth cycles. So we already know that the ancient systems of belief of indigenous people, of tribes, they lived according to the patterns of the earth. They lived in harmony with the earth, and their life was truly life that was filled with respect and adoration of nature. And we find this in Zen Buddhism too, as well as in other religions. We find this in Sufism too, and we find this in Hinduism too. So it's something that has been taken by various environmental activists. So while Gary Snyder uses these ideas in his work, we have already discussed these ideas in Eco-Spirituality by Llewellyn Waughnley. Famous poems and environmental messages. One of Snyder's most famous collections is Turtle Island, 1974, which won the Pulitzer for poetry. This collection is often considered a cornerstone of environmental poetry and contains numerous poems that express concern for the environment and celebrate nature's intrinsic value. Examples for the children. This poem is both a reflection on the environmental crisis and a message of hope for future generations. Snyder urges readers to stay together and learn the flowers to ensure that we pass on a sustainable world to our children. The poem ends on a note of cautious optimism, suggesting that while the earth is on a dangerous path, there is still time to change our ways. So we had talked about this poem earlier. We read this poem. So it is an address, or let's say a plea for future generations, that one must be able to admire, cherish and preserve nature if one wants to pass on a healthy environment to the coming generations. The poem has an environmental message. It emphasizes the intergenerational responsibility and the need for ecological wisdom to ensure the survival of both humanity and nature. Another poem, Mother Earth, Her Veils. In this poem, Snyder criticizes the destruction of nature, particularly the exploitation of the whales and other wildlife. he contrasts the beauty of nature with the violence inflicted upon it by industrial civilization. So, in this poem, he talks about the exploitation of wildlife, and as we can see that there are so many components of life on earth, and so he is talking about whales, and he contrasts the beauty of whales with the violence of industrial civilization. And I am reminded of the novel Old Man and the Sea, which is important because Hemingway won a Nobel Prize after this, after writing this novel, after the publication of this novel. But the important thing here is he was celebrating human courage and the human resilience against all the forces of fate and nature. And so at that time, the old man is seen as somebody who fights to conquer the ocean and to get the biggest fish, and that I think is supposed to be a celebration of human nature. But if we look at it from the environmental perspective, from the perspective of climate change, that is exactly what eco poetry is now trying to reverse, that human beings are not there to conquer nature, to win over it. They must develop a sustainable attitude, a balanced and harmonious relationship with nature. So that novel, it is an award-winning novel, but it shows a perspective that is, that is productive for climate change. It shows the Anthropocene, how man is at the center and man will never be beaten by nature. But the question is, why the competition between man and nature? Why must man try to control nature? Why can he not have a harmonious relationship with nature? So essentially, this novel portrays how before the 1980s, the literature was human-centered, representing the Anthropocene. But today, climate change poetry is changing that. So the environmental message of this poem, Mother Earth, Her Whales, is it is an indictment of human greed and exploitation, calling attention to the moral imperative of protecting the earth's creatures. W.S. Merwin, The Fragility of Nature and Environmental Degradation. Merwin is another key figure in climate poetry, known for his contemplative style and deep sense of environmental loss. His poetry often explores themes of ecological fragility, extinction, and the irreversible consequences of human actions on the natural world. The key themes in Merwin's poetry. Merwin's work is characterized by a sense of quiet mourning for what has been lost due to human carelessness and environmental degradation. His poems frequently explore the tension between humanity's destructive tendencies and nature's ability to endure, even in the face of devastation. Ecological fragility. Merwin's poetry is imbued with a sense of fragility, portraying nature as both resilient and vulnerable. He reflects on how ecosystems can be irreparably damaged by human environment interference, often expressing sorrow for the loss of species, landscapes, and ancient ecosystems. Silence and reflection. His poetry often features moments of silence and stillness, reflecting on the slow but unnoticed degradation of the natural world. Some famous poems and environmental messages. One of Merwin's best known collections, The Rain in the Trees, 1988, reflects his lifelong concern for environment, especially deforestation and species extinction. His work is notable for its minimalism and meditative tone, encouraging readers to reflect on the beauty of the natural world and the consequences of its destruction. Examples: For a Coming Extinction. This poem addresses the extinction of species, particularly whales, and reflects on the broader implications of their disappearance. Mervyn imagines a future in which humanity must confront the reality of a world without these creatures and the irreversible damage we have caused. So, as mentioned a little earlier, that some of the key themes are talking about the future in which our children or the grandchildren will not see the certain species that we are witnessing, as we are also unable to know and see the species that are already extinct. Environmental message. The poem is a poignant meditation on extinction, urging readers to consider the long-term consequences of human actions and the ethical responsibility we have to other species. So, it's like understanding that human beings and all the other living forms are living on the same earth and the same house, and they cannot afford to have any part of that house damaged or any beings in that house killed, because any loss anyway is going to affect human beings. So, human beings have an ethical responsibility to other species. Many religions hold that human beings are guardians of the earth, and they should live responsibly, especially because they are imbued with a higher intelligence or a higher soul, and so that is the very reason that they should act nobly towards other creatures on the earth. Yet another poem, the last one. In this poem, Mervyn addresses the theme of deforestation, imagining a world in which the last tree has been cut down. The poem critiques humanity's insatiable desire for resources, even when it leads to the destruction of the natural world. Environmental message. The last one serves as a warning about the dangers of deforestation and the resource depletion, emphasizing the short-sightedness of human greed. So, the sad thing about these trees is that some of them are very old. A tree can live for more than 100 years. But unhappily enough, in various institutions, there are trees that are 100 or more years old, but they cannot survive in the environment where there are many buildings and where they are cemented and asphalt roads and parks. So, this leads to their depletion and the dying of their roots, because they are unable to get water and oxygen when they are cemented all around. So, when we see this predicament, then one of these trees in actual, one realizes how all the individual species, whether they are butterflies or they are ladybirds or they are the fireflies that we don't see so much these days, or even trees and plants, they suffer the consequences of human exploitation and greed. So, we as human beings on the earth, according to eco poetry, are there to save the earth, to heal it, and to build a communication system now that is getting lost. So, we'll end this lesson here and we'll continue next time. Thank you.